fields concerned with the shaping of form, morphe, form, genesis, coming into being, fields to do with the coming into being of form. I thought a very brilliant idea, and of course I'll say more about it tomorrow, but this really led me into this whole field approach to biology. Not just him, but a whole series of biologists after him had developed this idea. So did you, in your, what stage did you come up with field ideas?
Well, when I started to, it was interesting, I was still stuck in the chemical world. And I identified that on the membrane, there are these structures called receptors. And there's an interesting parallel here, which we'll talk about again maybe tomorrow, and that is that we are made in the image of a cell, actually. So that if I talk about a cell or I talk about a human, we're still talking about the same thing. So the skin of the cell is very much similar to yours in a sense. It's a boundary that contains the inside, but it also has the ability to read the environment. So as we have eyes and ears and nose and taste and all these other receptors, cells have on them the same things but in micro form in a sense. So they're reading the environment, and the truth is, from my second grade image, when I first saw cells, I saw them as sentient beings. I didn't see them as just moving around in the water. They were like the amoeba would go look at something and then back away and then move somewhere else, or the paramecium. So I saw them as people, and it turns out to be, here's a very interesting relation, if you that we'll talk about at some point in regard to fractals, that we are made in the image of the cell. Every function that is in our human body is already present in every cell. Anything you can identify in here is in a cell. It's got digestive, respiratory, excretory, nervous, reproductive system. Every cell even got an immune system. And so the relevance that was really fun for me is that by understanding the nature of what the cells were reading in their environment, it changed their lives. And then I started to recognize this because I'm cloning these cells in a petri dish, and the simple thing that you've learned right away in culturing cells is sometimes the environment isn't that good when you culture them, and you put the cells into these cultures, and next thing you know they're sick and dying and they don't look very good. But I found if you take those cultures and then put them into a better environment, the cells immediately recover, grow, and start to flourish. And then all of a sudden it hit me, I said, oh my goodness, realize this, that while we see ourselves as single individual entities, that's a misperception, because the living things are cells. We are communities of cells, about 50 trillion cells has been suggested, making us up. Why that's relevant is that in a simple reality, we are like skin-covered petri dishes. And if we put our petri dishes in a good environment, then we flourish and do well. And if we put it in a bad environment, we start to reflect what was going on in that environment, and that we can come back and then get back into a good environment and recover. And why this became important is, for me, it took the emphasis to understand the nature of health and vitality was to look outside of the cell and not look inside the cell, which became, to me, a physical complement of the world. So the cell becomes a complement of its environment. And so then the issue is, what is that environment? And my conventional teaching only left me in the physical world of molecules and atoms and the material world. And it was at some point after I left my conventional job that I picked up a book by Heinz Pagels called The Cosmic Code. And it was about quantum physics. I had no idea about quantum physics, really, because as a biologist, I was just lucky enough to get through physics in school. And so, but it turned out that I realized that not only myself, but every one of my colleagues was only programmed with what is called Newtonian or, classical physics, which is a world based on material reality. That they didn't understand anything about quantum physics, neither did I. But as I started to read the book, I was totally shocked, because the simple truth is this: physics is the primal science. If you want to study biology, you got to know physics before you know biology. And I started to go back and I realized not only did I not know it, everyone in my field had no understanding of this physics. And the first thing the new physics said is, it's not the physical reality where the information is. It's in the field, the invisible stuff. And all of a sudden it was like that jumped me from my mechanical material world idea into entertaining the concept of the invisible force as being more powerful. And then, and what it ultimately brought to me was the concept of spirituality, which I didn't believe in. And I actually got into science to avoid the spiritual stuff. And it's interesting because when you're growing up and you hear these people give all this wonderful spiritual wisdom, and then as a kid you look at their lives, and even as a kid you go, geez, well, you know, that doesn't work for that guy very well, so why should you listen to that? And so I really went into science because I thought that's where I'm going to find all these truths to make sense out of my world. And the joke for me was, when I finally got to the awareness and I was already a tenured faculty member, I realized I was teaching religion as much as I was teaching science. And that's because we were just teaching dogmatic beliefs based on what everybody, you know, like a show of hands. How many people want to believe in this? Oh, that's enough people, so that's a rule. And so the issue about that is that I started to realize is that we were completely misunderstanding the nature of the game, and that you cannot live in this world without understanding first the mechanisms of the quantum mechanics, which is the foundation. And it's kind of weird because that's that weird science. You know, that's the one that's, it's a particle, it's a wave. How can it be both? And that's the nature of the game. And yet, the moment you bring that science into this field of biology that we're talking about, all the problems that we're really basically facing in the world today start to sort themselves out in much better solutions and resolutions than the mechanical drug pharmaceutical industry answer to the issues. And it's an unfortunate situation because my perception of it now is that this has been perhaps one of the biggest destructive events in biomedicine is their collusion with pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you. I found that the surprising thing for me was that while in the 20th century physics had become more open, discovering more and more weird things, quantum theory, indeterminacy, all the different wave-particle duality, quantum non-locality, in cosmology, weird phenomena like quasars, now multiple universes, all this stuff was going on. Physics getting broader and broader and stranger. In the same period, throughout the 20th century, biology has gone in exactly the opposite direction. It started broad, and it's got narrower and narrower and narrower, right through the 20th century. As when I was an undergraduate, most biology was still semi-holistic. We still looked at living animals and plants. Not much, but I mean, the first thing, you brought them into the lab, and they were alive for the first few minutes till you killed them. But they don't even have that now. My son's just been studying biology at school, at high school in England, and in his whole course, it was all molecular biology. They didn't see a single living or dead organism. They don't even dissect things anymore. It's all just learning about molecules. So I think that this extreme reductionist molecular biology thing has got worse, a lot worse, and made biology much narrower. And I saw this when I was, again, a student at Cambridge. I was studying biochemistry, and we had a series of special seminars given by molecular biologists, and I was one of a hand-picked group invited in the evenings to hang out with Francis Crick and Sidney Brenner. Both of them got the Nobel Prize, both of them eminent Cambridge biologists. And they were trying to persuade us, who they thought was this group of promising biochemists, to go into molecular biology. This was in 1963. And they explained their approach, and it was very clear. Francis Crick said, we've figured out the genetic code in 10 years. He said, we've understood the basic key to life in 10 years. There are two basic problems still unsolved, developmental biology and consciousness. He said, the only reason they haven't been solved so far is the people who are studying them just aren't smart enough. He said, I'm taking consciousness, Sidney Brenner's taking developmental biology, and we'll have it figured out in 10 years in molecular terms. They believed this. It was a kind of evangelical crusade. They then persuaded grant-giving agencies, and later in the 70s and 80s, beginning then, investment companies to invest huge amounts in molecular biology, promising that sequencing the genome, the genetic modification of plants, all this kind of thing, will lead to huge profits. And the Human Genome Project was invented as a political move. The biologists have always suffered from physics envy. And there was a debate in the early 80s about physics has got big science, multi-billion-dollar projects like atom smashers, colliders, and so forth, as well as all the stuff they had, space programs. biology was still a kind of cottage industry. So they wanted some big project that would capture the imagination, that you could explain. It had to be something you could explain to President Reagan. Well, that limited your... that limited the possibilities. And they came up with the Human Genome Project. You know, it was big, it's human, it's a multi-billion-dollar, it's the kind of thing that would be a milestone in history. You know, it had all the right things. It was a smart move. It then meant there was a huge amount of money, billions of dollars invested in it. Then this led to biotech companies and all sorts of... And if you have hundreds of billions of dollars invested in molecular biology, that means there's lots of jobs. If there's lots of jobs, universities have to train people for those jobs. And it swung the entire balance of biology right over to the molecular side. Universities, many of them hardly do any other biology now. So this was, I think, a deliberate thing with market forces going along with it that has led to this tremendous distortion of biology in this reductionist direction. Of course, the Human Genome Project turned out to be a big disappointment. I mean, they were expecting that we'd all have by now, you know, individualized medicine, all sorts of enormous benefits were supposed to flow. They didn't. And when the genome was finally sequenced, you know, the private genome company, Celera Genomics, that was going to patent hundreds of human genes and make lots of money out of patenting genes, headed by Craig Venter, in 2000, their shares were trading at about $230 a share. Within a few months, they were about $8 a share. They're now $7 a share. And when people actually saw the results, and when there was a tremendous anticlimax, a tremendous sense of disappointment. And I read an interview with Craig Venter, who at least has a good sense of humor. He said, "I'm a guy that's made $1 million the hard way by working my way down from $1 billion." So I think that this enormous boom in molecular biology, leading to a tremendous distortion of the whole of biology, might actually be coming to an end, because it's running into the ground. And one reason I think this is that molecular biologists are now drowning in data. They've sequenced not just the human, but dozens of other genomes. There are computer databases stacked with these huge amounts of information. It's now easy to buy machines that do this. Every issue of Nature and Science, the leading international journals, are crammed with full-page ads for sequencing machines, molecular biology, chemicals, and so forth. They just don't know what to do with it. Now they think that by hiring computer experts and calling it bioinformatics, that somehow the answer will appear. But actually, the more smart guys in that field are realizing that just piling up detailed molecular data isn't going to work.
It was a real interesting, to me it was not a disappointment, it was a total failure of the system for this reason. That a very interesting point, because Paul Silverman, one of the architects of the Human Genome Project, wrote, and I didn't know it myself because I was caught up in the field thinking, Human Genome Project sounds like a good humanitarian kind of thing to do. And then I read what it was principled on, and it was really created by venture capitalists. Yes. And the reason for it was this. They anticipated that they were going to make a list of all the genes in the human body. And so that any defect that anybody would ever have would be some way connected to a gene. And if they could identify every one of these genes, then every one would be like a new drug that they could use to treat anybody's particular illness. And when the project got off the ground, the venture capitalists were all excited because according to the model, it would take over 100,000 genes, maybe 150,000 genes to make a human. And of course, the venture capitalists, that's 150,000 new drugs. That's where everybody jumped on the bandwagon. They were going to patent them all. In fact, I think they have patented all of the gene segments at this point. But the failure was, and they didn't talk about it, which is always a fun part, when the results came in, there ends up to be about 21,000 genes. And why this is relevant is that some of the smallest animals on this planet have about the exact same number of genes. And so the reality, there was no difference between men and worms in this regard. And it really it just blew the bubble up because it was all, as you said, all the plans. As soon as we have this list of genes, we're going to be able